News reporters swarmed the area, moving from one employee to another, eager to conduct interviews. Photographers snapped pictures of the lifeless body of the woman who had fallen from the scaffold at the law firm. Meanwhile, videographers captured the crime scene, their camera lights flashing rapidly, capturing every detail. The front of Archer's law firm was a chaotic scene, as reporters vied for valuable information about the case to report for their respective news outlets. "Oh, look, it's the Archer family," a reporter exclaimed, pointing towards Mr. Damon and his family as they exited the firm. This sparked a frenzy, with every reporter rushing towards them, their camera lights flickering as if it were a red carpet event. The Archers were known as one of the most influential families in Europe, with a vast conglomerate and a prestigious law firm under their name. "Mr. Archer, how do you feel? Can you provide any details about the victim? Did you know her? Was she a client of yours? What are your intentions moving forward? Do you have any information about her? Was she pushed off the scaffold? Should her death be classified as abetting or aiding suicide? And Miss Diane, what do you have to say?" The reporters fired off their questions rapidly, but Mr. Damon remained silent and entered his car, slamming the door in frustration. Meanwhile, a knock on the door interrupted Harry, prompting him to quickly descend the stairs to see who it was. "Hi, Mr. Harry. This is the cake you ordered," the vendor said, offering the cake with a gentle smile. "Thank you," Harry replied, returning the smile as he accepted the cake before closing the door. Today, Harry celebrated his wedding anniversary with Diane, the esteemed daughter of the Archer family. 5 years had passed since they exchanged vows, and his love for her still burned brightly within his heart. However, the reality of those 5 years was marred by constant humiliation and insults from his in-laws, particularly his mother and father-in-law. Their superior social status made Harry feel inadequate, but his love for Diane persevered, shining through the darkness. In Harry's eyes, Diane's actions were always influenced by her parents, and he chose to shrug off the hurtful acts, believing that her love for him remained genuine. Their love story began 6 years ago when they met at her father's firm, where Harry started as an intern. Unknown to him, Diane had married him solely to avoid the arranged marriage her father had planned. She desired a partner she could control, and Harry became her chosen vessel while keeping a facade she couldn't no longer keep again. Despite his rise within the law firm, becoming a top attorney over the years, Harry's father-in-law refused to provide him with a paycheck. Instead, he blackmailed Harry, exploiting their familial connection to benefit the family's assets. Yet, through the generosity of clients, Harry managed to save enough to surprise his wife on this special day, their anniversary. The entire house was adorned with roses, their delicate fragrance filling the air, as he hoped to sweep Diane off her feet. As the minutes ticked by, Harry's anticipation grew, and he found himself constantly checking his watch, acutely aware of the passing seconds. Another knock on the door interrupted his careful flower arrangements on their bed. Nervously, he hurried down the stairs, holding on to the hope that this anniversary celebration would unfold differently from the previous attempts that had ended in disappointment. The first anniversary saw Diane failing to return home, offering flimsy excuses, while the second anniversary was disrupted by his father-in-law, who coerced him into attending to an urgent client, spoiling his plans. Butterflies fluttered wildly in Harry's stomach as he descended the stairs. His heart raced, and his palms grew damp with perspiration. Trusting his instincts, he made his way down with the cake and a bouquet in hand, finally opening the door. "What took you so long?" His mother-in-law, Mrs. Freya, began to snap, but her words faltered as she glanced around the sitting room, adorned with vibrant red roses. Mrs. Freya blinked rapidly, as if trying to refocus her gaze, her features softening in the face of the romantic scene that unfolded before her. As Harry laid eyes upon Diane, his heart fluttered within his chest, as if delicate wings had sprouted. "It's our 5th anniversary, babe," Harry said, a warm and gentle smile spreading across his face, reflecting the deep affection he felt for her. He approached Diane, choosing to ignore his mother-in-law's presence, but Diane scoffed dismissively. "5th anniversary, you say? Is that all you know? She retorted, her frustration evident in her disdainful tone. Does this atmosphere look like a place to celebrate our anniversary? But, babe, I thought, Harry began, his voice tinged with confusion. What's there to celebrate? Get this out of my face. Diane snapped angrily, cutting him short as she walked past him with a swagger, her head held high and her movements purposeful. Celebrate an anniversary with such a cheap cake and tacky decorations. You must think I'm that low, she added, her anger palpable as she knocked the cake from Harry's hand, causing it to fall. In a fit of rage, she snatched the bouquets and mercilessly smashed them against the tiles in the sitting room. Lunatic! His mother-in-law, Freya, cursed, making herself comfortable on one of the plush couches. I've always said this boy is useless. Imagine celebrating an anniversary at this critical time. Well, I don't blame you. What would a useless, low-life orphan understand? She added, twisting her face in disgust. What has this anniversary brought that calls for celebration? Nothing. Only disappointments. Mrs. Freya sighed, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. The room grew heavier, the atmosphere thick with melancholy. Harry could only hear the sound of his own silent whimper echoing in the ensuing silence as the corners of his mouth drooped, forming a deep frown. He stared blankly at everyone in the room, lost in the sea of his own thoughts. His mind swirled with confusion, like dice in a chaotic game. He struggled to comprehend why everyone's faces seemed so pale, attempting to make sense of it all, but it felt like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. So he stood there, feeling as lost as a lamb without a shepherd. The insults had become a familiar occurrence for him over the past 5 years, and he had grown accustomed to the verbal abuse. Despite being an asset in his father-in-law's law firm, he was still treated as insignificant. Diane, what happened? He whispered finally, his face reflecting concern. Don't you have a phone, you fool? His mother-in-law interjected, frustration evident in her voice. Oh my God! Diane, where did you find this guy? Such a nuisance. It's all over the news. A young woman fell off a scaffold. No, she committed suicide, and now the media is focusing on the firm, Diane explained weakly, not willing to elaborate further. Harry quickly retrieved his phone and clicked on one of the news websites. The headline read, "Lawyer accused of assisting in suicide." Was it a crime of passion or a professional hit? He leaned in closer, squinting his eyes as if trying to confirm the reality of what he was seeing. Raising an eyebrow in disbelief, he asked, "The news says it was an assisted suicide. Was she a lawyer?" With an eye roll, Diane sighed. "Don't you know how the media distorts things?" Harry pretended not to hear her and continued searching for videos of the victim. When he found one, his hands instinctively flew to his mouth to stifle a shout. He stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over his own feet in astonishment, as he saw the image of the woman he had met just a few hours ago. "Do you know her?" Mr. Archer leaned forward upon noticing Harry's astonishment, eager to hear his response. "Yes, sir, I met her earlier today at the firm. She asked for my help with a particular case, but I directed her to other lawyers," Harry answered, recalling his brief encounter with the lady in question. It was nearly 2 p.m. when Jane burst into his office, her entrance marked by rudeness. She was petite and dressed elegantly in a customized Burberry outfit, paired with Jada Dubai Passion diamond stilettos, one of the most expensive silhouettes. The pendant around her neck bore the name Jane, suggesting her identity and indicating her affluent background. She had approached Harry, asking him to take on her case, but when he declined and directed her to other attorneys, she unleashed a storm of insults upon him. "She asked you to help her with a case?" Mr. Damon asked, seeking confirmation. Harry nodded in affirmation. "What did she tell you about the case? What does she want? Did she provide any documents?" Mr. Damon bombarded Harry with questions, his brow furrowed as if trying to conceal something. "No, sir," Harry replied, taken aback by the sudden barrage of questions and the intense scrutiny from his father-in-law, Mr. Damon. "What about the surveillance camera?" Harry turned to Mr. Damon, who dismissed the idea with a hiss. We could potentially identify her killers from the surveillance footage and clear our name. I'm certain her death is related to the case. Someone may have pushed her off the scaffold. Harry suggested once again, but Mr. Damon didn't even spare him a glance. What a useless surveillance camera, his mother-in-law bellowed. Just be quiet if you have nothing sensible to say. Harry, you can go. I'll handle this with my parents, Diane said dismissively, but Harry refused. I am a part of this family too. We'll figure it out together. Harry knew he might not be able to offer much assistance, but leaving them alone would only reinforce the perception of his own uselessness. Harry, Mr. Archer began, his voice nearly inaudible and his face pale. This will impact the entire Archers group, not just the law firm. It will affect all of us, including my political career and especially the law firm. I am aware of that. Sir, how can we help? Harry asked, eager to hear his father-in-law's response. He had always longed for this moment when Mr. Archer would involve him in crucial matters and seek his assistance as his son-in-law. It was an opportunity for Harry to prove his worth to his in-laws and defy their negative perceptions of his marriage to their daughter. Are you willing to take responsibility? Mr. Archer asked, fixing his gaze upon Harry, who nodded in agreement. I want you to shoulder the blame, he ordered, and Harry's eyes widened in astonishment. Sir, yes, take the blame. Accept responsibility for her death, whether aiding or abetting, whichever you prefer, he repeated. Yes, I want you to take the blame for this case, Mr. Archer reiterated, speaking slowly and clearly to ensure Harry could understand. How? Harry's face contorted with a puzzled expression, eyebrows raised, and a quizzical look as he observed everyone in the room. They all seemed to be in agreement with the plan. Harry, I know you've got this. Trust me, you can handle it, Diane praised insincerely, but he scoffed. You knew about this? His thoughts resembled a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, making it impossible for him to see the full picture. Trying to ask questions and seeking clarification would seem useless. He let out a deep sigh of frustration, feeling the weight of confusion pressing down on him. Harry, just listen to Dad's grand plan. You won't go to jail or face anything worse. You're the only one who can pull this off, she reassured him. Why?
Grand plan.
Harry managed to inquire. Diane rolled her eyes, clearly tired of Harry's questions. She had expected him to accept without protest. Harry, come on. You're not well known, so the media won't care if you take responsibility. They won't dwell on the case any longer, she said, attempting to convince him. She reached out to hold his arm, but he broke free. Yes, she was right about Harry being relatively unknown, despite being married to the great Archer's only daughter. He was somewhat popular in legal circles for being a skilled and principled attorney who never missed a case, but outside of that, few recognized him as Diane's husband. Only his close colleagues at the law firm knew that. At least I see one advantage of being a nobody, Mrs. Freya mocked, causing Harry to gulp. He winced, displaying a visible expression of pain on his face, struggling to accept the situation as Diane held his palms. A warm, reassuring smile graced Diane's lips as she leaned in and placed a hand on his cheek, feigning affection. She gazed into his eyes, raising her hand to caress his cheek with a tender touch, attempting to convey love and care in that fleeting moment. You know my dad has a lot at stake, she said, her voice tinged with sorrow. His political career, the firm, his companies, and the Archer Group as a whole. I believe these people are trying to frame him and bring him down. Babe, you can do this for our family. You can. She continued to plead, her tone more empathetic, but Harry remained adamant, still trying to digest the sudden and unexpected situation before him. Frame him, Harry groaned. But we can use the surveillance camera to identify whoever did it. How is that framing? Dumbass. The surveillance camera was undergoing maintenance during that period. Don't you dare bring that up and give the media something to feast on. Mrs. Freya scolded, her anger making her stand tall and erect, exuding a sense of power and dominance. This is the only opportunity to prove you're good enough, Diane whispered affectionately, as if she genuinely cared, nudging Harry, who remained stubborn. For what felt like several minutes, the entire house fell into silence. Each person stole glances at Harry from the corners of their eyes. The room felt stifling, as if the walls were closing in on them. Mr. Damon paced back and forth, unable to stand still for even a moment. He couldn't hold back any longer, and a sneer marred his features. "Damn it! So after everything I've done for you in your career as an attorney, you won't even do me this one favor." His frustration was evident in his voice as he continued, "If you don't want to do it, fine. I wonder why I thought you would be of any use to me. You're not even good enough for my daughter." "I'll do it," Harry muttered, forcing Mr. Damon to come to a halt before entering the room. A heavy silence fell upon the room, as if everyone held their breath in collective surprise, which indeed they did. Mrs. Freya and her husband tasted a mix of confusion and wonder, their astonishment lingering on their tongues. Diane stood there, a smug smirk curling up her lips, satisfied with the turn of events. "What?" Mr. Archer's voice brimmed with astonishment, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I'll do it for the family," Harry reiterated, making his willingness clear despite his inner turmoil. He fought against his instincts and accepted to take the blame for the girl he knew nothing about, just to prove to his in-laws that he was good enough for Diane. Happiness washed over Mr. Damon like a gentle wave, soothing his worries and fears. He couldn't spare a moment to think about how the media would portray the death and force the government to launch major investigations. Seeing everyone's faces adorned with smiles, Harry forced a contented smile to play along with the fake gratitude that filled the room. Finally, he saw his in-laws smile about him, rather than cursing him out. "Sir, what's your plan?" Harry asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Now I can finally consider you good enough for my prestigious daughter," Mrs. Freya remarked with a broad smile, and Harry rolled his eyes in disgust at her comment. "You'll tell the media that the girl was your secret lover, someone you had been seeing behind your wife's back. She became pregnant, and you told her to have an abortion, but she refused. You were involved in her suicide," Mr. Archer explained. "What?" Harry exclaimed, his brows furrowed as he fixed an intense gaze on Mr. Damon. "Involved in her suicide?" His voice rose in disbelief. "That's the same as saying I killed her. How can I say I was involved? It's murder. What if her family decides to press charges or take it further when I confess to this?" He dismissed the idea, his voice filled with concern. "Can you stop yelling and listen to what he has to say? We have everything under control," Mrs. Archer cautioned him, snapping her fingers as if she were scolding a child. "Dad, that's too much. How can he say he was involved in her suicide? The media might twist it to make it seem like he pushed her off the scaffold." Diane grumbled, voicing her objection. "We're the Archers." Mr. Damon chuckled lightly before continuing. "If they want to go down that route, then we'll handle it. They can't defeat us in that arena," he shrugged with pride. "We have to make it as real and controversial as possible. That way, the media will shift its focus entirely from the Archers and feast on this story," he explained. "But, Diane, no buts. This is the only way," Mr. Damon interrupted, faking grief. "Dad, that wasn't what we agreed on. I'll be expecting an increase, then," Diane protested, smiling at her dad. "Agreed on." Harry bit his lip, trying to digest the news. His wife had betrayed him for some dollar bills. What kind of deal was she talking about? "Diane!" Mr. Archer scowled, forcing his daughter to comply with his words. Diane sighed disappointedly, giving in to her father's demands. "Harry," Mr. Archer began, "once you're arrested for aiding suicide, you'll be released within the next 48 hours. After your release, you'll be taken to South Africa, far away from here. There, you and your wife will start a new life, overseeing the Archer conglomerates in SA, he proposed gleefully. That's quite a favorable deal for a lowlife like you. You won't get such a great opportunity to elevate your life again, Mrs. Freya remarked, fixing her eyes on Harry, who was torn between right and wrong. In the next 48 hours, you'll be out to meet your wife. Once you are out, your flight will be ready. Trust me, Harry. You have my word. Mr. Archer reassured Harry with a smirk. Harry felt a sense of satisfaction that his in-laws would finally see a way to believe in him or even appreciate him. After being married to their daughter for 5 years, all he had received was insults and criticism. Now they were giving him a chance to prove his worth, and he was willing to go the extra mile to seize it. "Okay, sir, if you'll excuse me, I want to freshen up," he said, turning to leave, but his mother-in-law snapped at him. "Where the hell do you think you're going? Come on. Clean up this mess. Make sure you wipe those tiles clean. You can't even afford them. Pick up those cheap roses, remove those tacky decorations," she ordered, pointing at the cake Diane had knocked to the floor. Harry sighed before quickly doing as he was told, then rushed up the stairs to his room. It's been exactly a month and 3 weeks since Harry was arrested for the murder he didn't commit. No contact with any outsider, and he had almost lost his sanity. But what kept him going was his love for Dane. For the first 2 weeks, he thought Diane would help him. But after a month, he lost hope and prepared for whatever would happen to him in prison. He knew he was in hell, and the torture was getting too much daily. But he refused to grant them the statement they requested from him. Since Mr. Damon didn't keep to his side of the deal, Harry refused to give them any statement nor make the video confessions he was asked to. Sitting on the worn-out chair in his cell room, he sighed disappointedly as he carelessly leaned his back angrily against the wall. He groaned in pain as his back hit the wall. His back was filled with bruises from the whips and torture he had gone through. The next minute, the door to his cell creaked open, and the warder and 2 hefty officers stood in front of him like statues. His heartbeat doubled as he began to sweat at the thought of what was about to happen. "Drag him out!" The cold and harsh voice of the warder came on, piercing Harry's skin like it was a knife. As they dragged him out, instead of the regular dungeon where he was always whipped, he was taken to the counter. On reaching there, Harry's eyes met Mrs. Freya's own, and a sigh of relief escaped his lips, reflexly thinking she was coming to do the needful. Take him out of this place. Ma good. Harry trailed off, his intense gaze fixed on Mrs. Freya as he saw the document on the table. "And what's good about it? Let's cut the chase, Harry." She started slowly opening the documents. "This is your divorce papers. Sign it and let my daughter go, for God's sake," she bellowed, pushing the documents to Harry's side and throwing a pen at him. No. Harry protested silently, refusing to believe Diane wants to divorce him. Divorcing him now of all times? "Ma, what do you mean?" Harry finally asked, refusing to believe Diane wants to divorce him now. "What's more to explain? Sign those papers and let my daughter go. You have caged her for 5 years. She's done. Sign it and get out of her life. You are not good enough for her. You can never be. Sign those papers and save me the stress," she hollered angrily. Harry shot her a glare, forcing Mrs. Freya to draw back from her close distance to him. She really hasn't seen him this furious since the 5 years she had known him. "And she doesn't have the courtesy to come and give me the papers herself?" Harry spat, his fiery eyes fixed on his mother-in-law. "Courtesy?" the wardener chimed in mockingly. "Immagine." Mrs. Freya supported. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. "You lowlife. Sign those papers this minute and let my daughter live her life. You've wasted 5 good years for her," Mrs. Freya added, her tone laced with frustration. She clearly was tired of Harry wasting time on signing the documents. 5 years? Wasted, Harry thought, knowing within these 5 years were just humiliation, cheating, and disrespect. "I won't sign those papers until Dane comes here to do the closure herself," Harry proposed, knowing he at least deserved a good closure if she really wanted to divorce him. "There's no need for that. She is out of town with her new man, so I wonder why you want her to see you? An official closure, you say? I'm here myself, so it's enough officiality for a low life for you," Mrs. Freya snapped, spanking the table angrily. Harry sat staring blankly at the papers. Mrs. Freya's words clouded his mind about Diane with her new man. Did she move on that quick? He swallowed his saliva, trying not to show how much pain he was feeling. He dragged his chair backwards, picked up the pen, and signed the documents. Once he did, a satisfied smirk formed across Mrs. Freya's lips as she couldn't hide her excitement. Harry stood up to move back to his cell, but the warder's voice snapped at him. "Where to? Let's go for some exercise in the dungeon." Harry's shoulders slumped, a sign of exhaustion. Fatigue settled over him like a heavy wet blanket, knowing what kind of an exercise they were about to do. "Please," Harry begged, hoping he would give him listening ears. But the man didn't even spare him a glance. "I swear to God I didn't do anything. It was all a setup by Mr. Archer. I didn't commit murder." "Shut it," the warder scowled. "Enough of Mr. Archer. You killed an innocent girl. Everyone confirmed it, the camera covered you, but you still retort to lying. Give it up and confess so you get your sentence." "Sentence?" Harry furrowed his brows, unsure which sentence they meant. He kept getting whipped but didn't cry. Instead, he groaned silently. "I don't know what you intend to prove, but listen up. You're on your own. The earlier the better, and you'll be set free to serve your jail term. You can't escape this. The Archer's law firm is on your case." The warder added frustration evident in his voice. He clearly was tired of whipping Harry every day and still not getting any statement out of him.
"I'm innocent."
"Hear me out. I've nothing to do with it. Ask Diane or my mother-in-law," Harry said in defiance, but the officers and the warden all had an uproar of laughter. Harry managed to raise his head a bit as he looked around, eager to know what amused them, but he saw nothing. "Your mother-in-law?" The warden scoffed. "Clear delusions. You think the Archers would associate themselves with a murderer like you? The beautiful sissy. Miss, I'm sure she would be getting married soon to someone up to her par. So murderer, you've no mother-in-law," the warder mocked. "Continue," he shouted at the officers who had slowed down whipping Harry. "What were you thinking, keeping Miss Dane all to yourself? You were never her par, so stop daydreaming of having her back," he added, but Harry just kept mute and seethed silently, taking the pains of the whippings. As they continued whipping him, he just stayed still without making a sound. The wounds and pains the whips inflicted on him were the least of his worries now as he tried to digest what the warden had just said about being sure of Diane getting married soon. The pain in his heart was worse than the physical one. Dane was getting married? He refused to believe, but what more evidence did he want? He closed his eyes, swallowing his saliva as he clenched his fists. The Archers had betrayed him. Not only did they betray him, but they also framed him for a crime he didn't commit. To add to it, Dane is getting married. Even Diane had betrayed him. Harry watched as a shadow kept approaching the dungeon, unsure who it was. He believed it would be another officer who had come to interchange the ones who were getting exhausted from flogging him. "Stop that this minute," an authoritative voice demanded. It seemed to be the approaching shadow, but who was it that would go against Mr. Damon's order? At this point, Harry didn't care anymore. He decided it was only right he fainted at this moment. Harry winced as he opened one eye, realizing that he was lying on a luxurious bed in a room that exudes luxury. The tiles, ceilings, and even the bed itself appeared incredibly expensive. He was surprised by how he got there, and upon opening both eyes, he tried to get up, despite the pain from the previous beating. "Arg!" he screamed, catching the attention of a man in a white coat who was in the room. The man quickly helped Harry sit up. "Young master, you're awake?" The man in the white coat, who seemed to be taking care of him, said with a soft smile. "I'm the royal doctor of the Luciano family, young Master Tazio. Welcome back to the family," he added. "Young master," Harry scoffed, scratching his head, perplexed. "Luciano M." Before he could finish, the door creaked open, revealing Pietro, Mr. Damon's right-hand man, who does his dirty biddings and is known for his ruthlessness. Harry knew Pietro was a dangerous figure in the Archer family. As Pietro approached, Harry's eyes widened in fear, though he did his best not to show it. He sat still, watching Pietro as he reached the side of the bed. "Young master." Pietro's knee gave way before Harry. Harry sat biting his bottom lips while he tapped his feet nervously, furrowing his brows, puzzled by what was happening. Various thoughts raced through his mind, trying to make sense of the situation. Was Pietro the one who had saved him? Did Mr. Damon send him? Harry tried to piece together the puzzle of the scene before him, but it felt like solving a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. "I'm sorry, young master, it's all my fault," Pietro pleaded, his voice almost inaudible, still kneeling and bowing his head before Harry. "Young master," Pietro began, clearing his throat, nearly choking on his emotions. "It's my fault for not noticing you all these years. Young master, please." "I'm sorry," he pleaded. Harry still seemed lost. "Who are you? Did Mr. Damon send you?" Harry interrupted, eager to hear his reply. "I'm your late father's butler," Pietro started but paused for a moment. "Rest in peace, Addison Luciano," he said, and both he and the doctor bowed in unison like they were performing an official death rite. "I'm Harry Thompson. I'm an orphan," Harry retorted, his frustration evident in his voice. "And stop calling me that. I'm no young master." "Young master, you need to calm down," Pietro began. "You're free now, and no one born of a woman can take you back to that place," Pietro boasted, his voice laced with pride. Harry's curiosity was piqued. Who were they to defy Mr. Damon's order and boast about it? He remained skeptical about his newfound freedom, wondering if Pietro and Mr. Damon had a fallout or if Pietro intended to use him against Mr. Damon. Many questions swirled in his mind, and he didn't want to be a pawn in a larger game again. "Can you all just wait? What if I'm not who you think I am?" Harry inquired, looking at Pietro for his response. "How do you know I am who you think I am? What if I'm not even who you guys think I am?" he added. Pietro, who was now seated on the couch in the room, stood up and walked closer to Harry, whispering, "Your tattoos, young master." "Which tattoos?" Harry scoffed, reluctantly. "The quantum restoration tattoos on your back," Pietro explained, and Harry blinked his eyes repeatedly, knowing he was telling the truth. Harry had never understood the meaning of the tattoos. Whenever Diane asked, he had simply dismissed them as birthmarks, but everything seems to be making sense now. The tattoos seemed to be a birthmark, so he would be recognized easily. The quantum restoration tattoos were a symbol for only the Luciano family who had the gift on healing. Pietro seemed to have noticed the tattoos when he came to the dungeon to convey Mr. Damon's orders about forcing Harry to give a statement. "Mr. Archer." Pietro seethed silently, remembering the condition he found Harry in. "So who am I? I still don't understand," he added, fixing his gaze on Pietro, who wore a small smile. "Young master, you are Tazio Luciano, the only surviving heir to the Luciano family and the heir to the Luciano's conglomerates around the world," he replied with a soft smile. "What do you mean, Luciano's conglomerates?" Harry asked, still astonished by Pietro's revelation. Was this really a second chance at life? He thought to himself. "Young master, you have $1 billion inheritance, liquid investments, assets, and much more. Most importantly, you have the Italian mobsters at your service, ready to do anything for you," Pietro added with a satisfied smirk. "What happened to my parents?" Harry inquired, still in shock over the revelation. He had many questions to ask. He didn't remember anything about his parents, or even how they looked except his caregiver who took care of him until the night their house was attacked. Pietro took a deep breath and let out a disappointed sigh before he began. "Young master, some enemies orchestrated the attack, and in the chaos we lost both of your parents. However, you were fortunate to be out of the country. Your father didn't want anyone to know about his son until you were mature enough to handle the affairs in Luciano's family." Pietro sighed again before continuing. "So you were kept far away, but they still traced you to Ms. Wilfred's house. That night you saw Ms. Wilfred, your caregiver, taken away. The one who saved you was Mr. Xavier here," Pietro said, pointing to the doctor sitting opposite Harry. "Young master, thank you for being alive," Pietro added, bowing his head again. "But how did you end up in Mr. Damon's house?" Harry asked Pietro, leaning in to hear his response. His newfound freedom still sounded all good to be true. "Young master, after you escaped, we all infiltrated different parts of the world in search of you," Pietro explained with another sigh. "I'm sorry for not noticing you earlier. How did you get me out?" Harry inquired further. "I asked the head of the police to secure your release," Pietro answered reluctantly. "The head of police? Am I that important?" Harry furrowed his brows, astonished. Young master, you need to meet someone for a brief. Harry cut Pietro off, saying, Who? Your lawyer, sir. Pietro pointed to the TV which was connected to the security camera installed outside the building. He stared at the figure, a woman with long hair cascading down her back. Her dark, black eyes shone, giving her a unique presence. She had a slender yet curvy figure, resembling a South African actress who was both slender and curvaceous. Harry sat in his room, observing as she entered his suite, her heels clicking against the marbled floor. She settled comfortably on one of the plush couches in the sitting room, then a deep sigh of relief like she had waited all day. Can we go outside to meet her? She's been here for the past 6 hours, but I told her to wait until you've rested enough. Pietro pleaded, and he helped Harry up. Hi, sir, she stuttered, her gaze lingering on Harry's bare chest. I'm Miss Bruce Jade, she added, trying to make herself comfortable on the couch, though her eyes remained fixed on him. So, who's she? Harry finally asks, tired of her weak introduction. She's your attorney, young master, Pietro answered with a soft smile. Harry scoffed. A lawyer? Which attorney has a figure like an actress? He nudged Pietro, who pretended not to hear his master. Harry, now Tazio Luciano, sat in his family's grand mansion, a fire burning in his eyes. He had spent the last few weeks learning about the Luciano legacy, his family's vast business empire, and the enemies who had taken everything from him. His mind was set on one thing: revenge. Bruce Jade, his attorney, sat across from him, reviewing the latest reports. Young master, we've gathered enough evidence to bring Mr. Damon and the Archers down. Our allies in the police and the media are ready to expose their crimes. Harry nodded, his jaw clenched. Good. I want them to suffer for what they've done. But we need to be smart about this. They won't go down without a fight. Pietro entered the room, his expression grave. Young master, we've located Diane. She's being held by the Archers as leverage against you. They know we've been planning something. Harry's heart skipped a beat. Despite everything, a part of him still cared for Diane. We need to get her out. I won't let her suffer because of me. Bruce placed a reassuring hand on Harry's shoulder. We'll rescue her, Tazio, but we need to be strategic. Let's lure Mr. Damon and the Archers into a trap. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Harry and his team moved into position. Pietro had arranged for a covert meeting with Mr. Damon, under the guise of negotiating a truce. The plan was to confront him with the evidence and force a confession. Harry, Pietro, and Bruce entered the dimly lit warehouse where the meeting was set to take place. Mr. Damon and several Archer family members stood waiting, armed and wary. Mr. Damon, Harry began, stepping forward. It's over. We have evidence of your crimes. Surrender now, and maybe you'll see the inside of a prison cell instead of a grave. Mr. Damon laughed, a cold, menacing sound. You think you can threaten me, boy? You're nothing compared to the power we hold. Harry's eyes blazed. I'm Tazio Luciano, heir to the Luciano Empire, and you're going to pay for what you've done. Suddenly, shots rang out. Pietro and Bruce dove for cover, returning fire. Harry stayed focused on Mr. Damon, advancing steadily. Amidst the chaos, Harry saw Diane tied up in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. Diane! He shouted, moving towards her. Harry, be careful! She cried out. Mr. Damon aimed his gun at Harry, but before he could pull the trigger, a bullet from Pietro's gun found its mark, hitting Damon in the shoulder. Damon staggered, dropping his weapon. Harry reached Diane, cutting her free. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle despite the chaos around them. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought I'd never see you again. Let's get out of here, he said, helping her to her feet. With Diane safe, Harry turned back to Mr. Damon, who was clutching his wounded shoulder. This is for my parents, Harry said coldly, delivering a powerful punch that knocked Damon to the ground. Police sirens wailed in the distance as reinforcements arrived. The remaining Archers were quickly subdued. Harry's allies in the police force took Damon and his men into custody. Weeks later, Harry stood at the head of the conference table in the Luciano headquarters. The room was filled with his loyal supporters, including Bruce, Pietro, and Diane. They had dismantled the Archer family's empire and cleared Harry's name. "Thank you all for your support," Harry began. "We've taken back what's ours, and justice has been served. But this is just the beginning. We will rebuild and honor my parents' legacy." The room erupted in applause. Harry felt a sense of closure and triumph. He turned to Diane, who smiled warmly at him. "I'm so proud of you, Harry," she said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you, Diane," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Bruce stepped forward, a mischievous glint in her eye. "So, what's next for Tazio Luciano?" Harry smiled, a new sense of purpose filling him. "We rebuild, we expand, and we make sure no one ever dares to cross the Luciano family again." As they looked out over the city, Harry felt a renewed sense of hope. He had avenged his parents, reclaimed his identity, and found a new family in those who stood by him. The future was his to shape, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.